Hello, and welcome to the first installment of our Core Conversation Series. My name is Mark Letzer, President and CEO of the Maryland Center for History and Culture. By now, you are probably aware of our recent transformation. 2 weeks ago, after 176 years, the Maryland Historical Society reopened its doors as a Maryland Center for History and Culture, an identity that better reflects our mission and vision to provide space for the community to discover and develop a deeper understanding of our nation's history and culture through a Maryland prism. The Maryland Center for History and Culture has always been more than a museum and a library. We provide space for the community to hold meaningful conversations and explore the enormous impact Marylanders have had on our nation's history. Over the last several months, we have witnessed how important these conversations are during this time of transition in our country, our city, and our organization. Thousands of individuals interested in our region's history and in historic moments relevant to today have participated in our virtual programming, greatly expanding our reach beyond our walls and our state. We look forward to continuing these conversations well into the future. The four-part virtual Core Conversation Series celebrates the launch of our new identity. Each program asks a relevant and driving question, prompting conversation about important historical and cultural topics while highlighting MCHC's new core values: discovery, dialogue, authenticity, and community, that drive all our initiatives, including education programs, public programs, exhibitions, research requests, and visitor interactions. I encourage you to read our new mission, vision, and values on our brand new expanded website. We are incredibly lucky to have an old friend and colleague join us for our first program about discovery. Dr. Carla Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress on September the 14th, 2016. Dr. Hayden, the first woman and the first African American to lead the National Library, was nominated to the position by President Barack Obama on February 24th of 2016, and her nomination was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on July 13th. Prior to her latest post, she served since 1993 as CEO of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Hayden was nominated by President Obama to be a member of the National Museum and Library Services Board in January 2010 and was confirmed to that post by the Senate in June 2010. Prior to joining the Pratt Library, Dr. Hayden was Deputy Commissioner and Chief Librarian of the Chicago Public Library from 1991 to 1993. She was an Assistant Professor for Library and Information Services at the University of Pittsburgh from 1987 to 1991. Dr. Hayden was Library Services Coordinator for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago from 1982 to 1987. She began her career with the Chicago Public Library as the Young Adult Services Coordinator from 1979 to 1982 and as a Library Associate and Children's Librarian from 1973 to 1979. Dr. Hayden was President of the American Library Association from 2003 to 2004. And in 1995, she was the first African American to receive Library Journal's Librarian of the Year Award in recognition of her outreach services at the Pratt Library, which included an after-school center for Baltimore teens, offering homework assistance and college and career counseling. Dr. Hayden received a BA from Roosevelt University and an MA and a PhD from the Graduate Library School of the University of Chicago. We will welcome Dr. Hayden. Before we begin our program, I'm going to welcome and introduce our head librarian. Born and raised in Maryland, Catherine Mayfield began her career as a writer and editor before transitioning into libraries and archives. In 2019, she joined the Maryland Center for History and Culture after a decade in California, where her experience spanned government archives and the public library, including the management of local history archives. Catherine's work has encompassed launching digital collections, managing digitization projects, and developing community collaborations, resulting in exhibitions and public programs. She is passionate about working with students and researchers and helping to bring hidden history to light. Catherine holds a BA in Journalism and Mass Communications from New York University, a Master of Library and Information Science degree from San Jose State University, and a certificate in Arrangement and Description from the Society of American Architects, SAA. She's a member of the SAA, the Oral History Association, and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference. And we welcome Kate, and we welcome all of you to today's program.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. So I am zooming in from our virtual library, the H. Furlong Baldwin Library, which is currently undergoing renovations. We hope to see you back in the library soon, next month. So as a librarian, it is an incredible honor to be here today with Dr. Carla Hayden. Mark provided today's introduction, but I just can't help but state once again the remarkable trio of firsts embodied in Dr. Hayden. She is the first woman Librarian of Congress, the first African-American Librarian of Congress, as well as the first professional librarian to be in the post in over 60 years, meaning she studied library and information science at the graduate level and beyond. So you are a true inspiration to so many, Dr. Hayden.
Well, thank you.
Word inspiration and hero came up in a number of conversations that I had for today's meeting.
Thank you.
It's for sure in part due to that shattering of the glass ceiling that you've been responsible for, but also that career-long focus and ongoing commitment to bringing access and technology to communities and libraries. So Dr. Hayden, you're a trailblazer in every sense of the word and a model for many of us librarians of what is possible. I can continue on fangirling, but I know that we are here today to talk about
No, I appreciate it, Catherine. I really appreciate it.
So discovery is something that, is so central to the experience of libraries and museums. And it is one of our core values as an institution. So when we talked about this with our colleagues, what that process of discovery is, it's finding something new, learning new information, finding hidden perspectives. There's this active aha moment where things all of a sudden are different because you've learned something new. I'd love to know, Dr. Hayden, what do you think of when you hear that word discovery? What comes to mind? What does it mean to you?
It really, and thank you for those kind words again. And can I call you Kate?
Yes, of course.
Oh, good. It really brings to mind the natural curiosity of most young people. They want to find out and they ask why or what's this, or you're learning about things and you're opening up, as you mentioned, new vistas and things that you hadn't thought about. It also brings up the term serendipity, that you are looking at for one thing or you're discovering something and then it leads to another. And that can be a lifelong journey. And it's a journey of excitement and enlightenment that I still enjoy to this day and look forward to it.
Absolutely. I think that there's that, sometimes we come into these places, into libraries or museums, seeking that discovery. We know we've got that research question that we want to find that answer to, but other times it comes to us, like you said, serendipitously. That discovery reveals itself to us in an exhibition or in a program or, in ways that we're not expecting. I love that. It's exciting.
And I want to share with you something that David McCullough talked about. Years ago, he was kind of a journalist and doing some research on something, and he was in the Library of Congress, and he was waiting for the materials that he had asked for. And he looked over at another desk, and there was something about this great flood. And he got so interested in that, and that was one of his first books. And he said that's what did it. It was that serendipity, getting curious, discovering something, and it opened up his lifelong journey with nonfiction and research.
That's amazing. I love that. As a librarian, I think a lot of us feel this way, is that being able to watch that discovery in researchers is an incredible process. And that was something that I was wondering from you, how do you see that process of discovery active within visitors to libraries and museums?
Well, we always and have talked about librarians as the guides on the side, that we are the ones, when you think about doing a journey, or you're someone that's helping you find things, that we can be the people who say, well, did you think about this? Or here's something else, or this might help you. That we were helping people along those journeys. And now in the digital world, as you know, and you're working on it at every day, how do we translate that physical assistance that we're very used to? I mean, look at your background. I mean, that's oh my goodness. And then the browsing the shelves and everything. How do we translate that into the digital world and be those guides on the side?
Right. And I think right now with COVID as well, and just not being in libraries, some are just beginning to open up, but how do we make that opportunity for discovery available online?
Right. Safely. And also we have our own security issues in terms of putting things online and making sure. So that's an added thing. So it's an exciting time. I try to look at it in terms of encouraging people to get into the profession, to be an archivist, to think about being a historian or researcher or librarian. It's a perfect time because history is so much in the public consciousness now. Mm-hmm. With the pandemic. John M. Barry, the author of the book about the 1918, his book is a bestseller. He's all over the place because people want to, well, what happened then? And we have an opportunity to help with that discovery.
Right. I think, it's interesting. I think about that process of discovery as a student, and realizing that we have this agency to, especially, I think that's important to foster in young students, so that history can be exciting and that there are trails to follow and that you can do history. And I know we'll talk more about how to foster that in this time.
Right.
I'm wondering, that idea of discovery, why is it important that for people to experience that feeling?
Because I think it's, and when you think about young people and why that history never stops, and that there's more history to uncover and discover and history to be made. And you don't want to put it over there and say, okay, that's all done, but we're living history now. And you want to foster that sense of, what can I discover? What trail can I go down and bring to light, basically, things that hadn't been put together for people to look at. So you're looking at maybe some of the same letters that someone wrote or the same records or things, but you're getting inspired to travel down that part with those letters, and you are bringing something to light. So that's what I'm hoping. That what we do with young people, especially, and students, is to let them know that history isn't over.
Right. We talk about that a lot, so the past is the past, but history is continually being reinterpreted, interpreted as more information comes to light. We are still, donations continue to come into us, new materials, things that people have had in their attics or in their homes that they're trying to find that home for. And so these are added to collections. There's new information to discover, really.
And Kate, I have to ask, and being where you are, and with Maryland having such a rich history, that I discovered when I moved here. I thought, being from Illinois, that, we had it all. We had Lincoln, we'll talk about that. But what is it like and I have to, what is the term that you use now? Because I'm so used to society. So now with your
Right.
opening it up and changing it, and its history and culture, are people donating or saying, here are the papers that I found, or here are things? Are they still bringing things in?
People still are, even during our closure. We've been in touch with people. There are, you know, I think there have been some questions about whether has been even an increase in that right now, because people have been at home and been going through their homes and organizing. I don't know if I'd say I've seen a huge increase, but it feels pretty normal compared to other times, though we are also collecting stories related to COVID and the current pandemic. But that process of adding to collections has not stopped. And have you seen the same thing as well?
Yes, and that's what's interesting, that there are more discoveries to be made, and they can come through serendipity in terms of cleaning out a house after someone has passed, or just all types of ways. And yes, the collections are growing, and that's in the analog world.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I wanted to step back just a little bit. We've talked about your career, and it's one that has been marked by so many firsts. I'm wondering about, what is the place, if you think about your childhood, just to framework, what is that place that libraries and museums had in your early years? What did they mean to you?
Well, I mentioned Illinois, and I was fortunate that one set of grandparents lived in Springfield, Illinois. And so I would spend summers there and holidays there, and then another set lived in Champaign, Illinois, so you had the university. But the Springfield experience, and just being from Illinois in general, you grew up in a living, basically, museum, visiting Lincoln's home. 3 and 4 year, you just, there you are, going to New Salem and learning about the tragic romance. And so just everything, the downtown, there was the State House, there was his office. So growing up with that. And then my grandfather, and that side, was also, he had been the postman in a small town, Tuscola, Illinois, 10,000 people. But when he retired and they moved to Springfield, he would go and take me around the Capitol complex. So I got to see the State Museum, all of the State Library. A person in his, Miss Pendergrass was the librarian, African-American, and I would get to go to the State Library and do that. So that familiarity with libraries as places of like castles, and then the everyday history of Abraham Lincoln, it just, I loved it. loved it.
I love asking that question of other librarians, or everyone really. And everyone, as we are chatting today, if you want to share in the chat what libraries and museums have meant to you, please go ahead and do so. I know when I think about my early years, libraries, they were a central part of my childhood. I think about now how you might have an activity that you do with your mom, dad. My kids love to go fishing with but what I did with my dad was, we went to libraries. And growing up here in Maryland, lived in a town where, depending on where you lived, you could be in one of 4 different counties. Maryland's a small state, we say, but it has a very big history, which is another thing. But had many library cards, and went to all of the local libraries in my town, feeling like they had their own flavors and their unique collections, and kind of recognized that early on. But I always saw the library as it was a place of discovery, absolutely. Finding new perspectives and I found it a place of excitement. I loved going to fill up my bag of books and take those back home to dive into. The other thing is that place of community, I think, and of refuge.
And you were fortunate too to live in Maryland that's been called library heaven because of the closeness with the library community and the fact that you could use your library card at any jurisdiction and have different ones. And it really is a wonderful state for library services.
Right. And then there's also the treasure of Baltimore and of Washington, D.C. too, and all the incredible organizations there in both places. I remember kind of growing up outside of Baltimore, seeing the city in the distance and feeling like it was a beacon and wanting to be there, and had my favorite museums and take the train into DC as I got older. So I'm wondering with you, what was that point? You clearly decided to make this your career and devote your life to librarianship. What was that turning point for you? I read that you were a really avid reader as a child, but librarianship wasn't necessarily something you considered.
Oh, I loved libraries when I was, we moved to New York, but still had the family in Illinois, so I'd go back and forth. And there was a little branch library that across the street from my grammar school. And that's where I first saw a book, and I have it here. Bright April, first time I saw myself, a little brown girl in a book, and I still learned about library finds. Loved libraries, would always go, but I didn't think about how the books got there, who designed it, what the people that worked there, how did they do it? I just loved them. It wasn't until, and I call myself, and I've said it publicly, I'm an accidental librarian. I graduated from Roosevelt University in Chicago, and that was a university that was started and endorsed by with the blessing of Eleanor Roosevelt after World War II to really help and be very diverse. And so I majored in history and political science. I was thinking about, oh, what am I going to do after I graduated? And my mom, bless her heart, said, you should maybe think about employment while you figure this out. And so I would go to job interviews where they told me I didn't have any experience. So I always encourage young people to get internships and do that, even if you don't. But and my favorite place between job interviews was the Central Library in Chicago, a beautiful building. It's now the Cultural Center. And while I was there, a person who had just graduated with me said, hey, Carla, are you here for those library jobs? They're hiring anybody. And he met with bachelor's degrees. And as you know, Kate, we still do that in the profession. We hire people with different bachelor degrees and try to recruit them. And that's when I got introduced to librarianship as a profession, because they put me with a young lady who was going, Judy Zucker, who was going to graduate library school at University of Chicago. And that was just it. She wore jeans, she was cool, she was all of that. And I said, oh, wow, I can combine what I love, books and reading and discovery, and help other people. And that's when I decided to get into the profession. But before that, I really hadn't thought about how to look at your background. How did that all get there? You know, we just take it for granted.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I think I saw in the chat somebody was asking about that, about how you start getting into the archives or libraries. And I think that, yeah, the internship experience, volunteer experience, that's actually brought me into the library. I first volunteered in middle school. I remember helping out with summer reading at my public library. But I did have an earlier career as a writer and editor. And this was clearly before children, because I had time in my afternoons at one point to do something with myself. I'd moved to a new town, didn't know anyone, had thought about going back to library school, but I had this time to volunteer, and I did. And I remember I put books back on the shelf. We call that, so paging,
Shelving.
shelving, and I loved that job. I remember just feeling so lucky to be in the library surrounded by books, and it continued on from there. Just decided to go back to school and did almost every job in the public library, cataloging, marketing, reference, and found my thing. But that's something I definitely recommend to students, is to see what it is. I think that these early conversations are really important. And I see, thinking about our backgrounds, I see a difference today. And sometimes I've seen students who've come out of their bachelor's and known immediately that they want to do library science. And I think that's because there are these earlier conversations that are being had about what you can do with history, as well as what librarians do. And as a child, remember thinking librarians they helped me to find books, but didn't realize how much community programming was involved, and fostering connections, and so much more than checking out and having to find books, for sure. And
that there's a part, you mentioned you did cataloging, you did other things, that there's a variety of opportunities. So if you if you want to just do the digital, or if you want to work with people directly, that there are different slots for different types of interests in people too.
Yeah, that's something I've absolutely found, that I think you can find your thing in.
Yes, you can conserve, and if you like science and things, you could be in the preservation and conservation department. And all types of ways that you can do it. So that's what I think we join together with. How can we introduce young people to the variety?
For sure. And that kind of leads into this next question that I have about that role, and what do you see as that role for libraries and museums when it comes to discovery and kind of fostering some of these early feelings about libraries and this engagement?
Well, you touched what you said, engagement, and that's what the key. Library of Congress, for instance, just put a page together on the website entitled Engage, and it connects. If you're a teacher, you push here. If you're family, if you're this or that, and ways to engage with the collections and with the library staff members. Webinars for teachers, teaching with primary resources. And I know that the center does it. I think I have it, the Maryland Center. So
that's right.
Say it. And we all got to just say the Maryland Center does that so well, and has for years, making history come alive and engaging them with aspects of it, from food and just everything. So to find ways to make the history come alive, and also to know that libraries and museums are those trusted sources of information and presenting materials. They have the real thing. If you want to see the document, you have it, and you have the things that do. The authenticity of what you're presenting, I think, is a role that libraries and museums can step into with more certainty now, because people are searching for that.
Right. Yeah, that was something that I wanted to get into, is that power that there is in primary resources. Your institution, the Library of Congress, holds some of our nation's most incredible primary resources, true national treasures. What do you see as that power behind primary resources and in them?
And I'll tell you, and I'll start with an anecdote that makes it more of an urgent need to talk about how do you make sure that what you're presenting is authentic, provenance. Get that word out there and talk about that and say, well, here's the chain of ownership of this material. The recent anniversary of the Gettysburg Address the Library of Congress did a big thing on it because we have a copy of it called the Nicolay copy. That's Lincoln's personal secretary. You can tell anything Lincoln, I'm writing. So it's been like a kid in a treasure chest for me. But we put it out. There were guards with guns and everything standing next to the case. And we invited high schoolers in and we're saying, here it is. It doesn't come out often. It's a national treasure. And then we had a lady who put her hand up and just said, well, how do you know it's real? Mm-hmm. And it struck, after one curator almost keeled over, with like, you should look at this. We do this. And the sense that being able to show not only that and say, here's how we know, but also here are the contents of his pockets the night he was assassinated. You are showing items, and in museums in particular, here is this thing that was used or touched by this person, these people. All of that is very powerful, because when you're in the digital realm, things can be manipulated, things can be changed, right. But the power of the real thing is something that we have and we don't get to see as much, and we need to share with people.
Absolutely. One of my colleagues had an experience where she was reading through letters. I believe they were Civil War letters, or might have been a Civil War diary, but she could see on the pages as she was turning them tear stains. And it was very impactful for her, that seeing that connection from that original girl who was sitting there and writing to today. And online you could read those words, but to feel those pieces of paper, to see that physical evidence of what she had been through is very, very meaningful.
And see, that's what the historians and the librarians and the curators can bring out by looking at that she saw that, felt it, and when she engages with young people and shows them this, she can point it out and say to them, imagine a bunch of fifth graders standing around, and you say, what do you think that is? That's that being able to translate or help them see what's on that page.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And it's interesting. As a child, I was very into literature. I think a lot of us in the library field do come in that way, that we have there's a love of books there. And I remember from an early age in elementary school being taught to read between the lines with literature, to interpret what it is that you're reading. You're asked questions about, what is this character feeling? What did they mean when they said this? But my experience of learning history as a child was a very different one. It was more, the way I remember it, at least, more, this is what happened. Here are the dates, here are the names. Remember it. It was more passive. And I found that really hard to engage with. Like, I found it difficult to understand how I fit into that picture or what I could contribute. And I think that's something that is really changing today with the way that history is taught at different levels throughout the years. That early on I see this in some of the education programs that we have at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. The way you look at a primary resource together as a class, and questions are being asked from your teacher, from our staff, of what are they saying here? What does this mean? Why do you think that they said this? And it invites you in, I think, and you feel like your interpretation matters, and that you have something to say and contribute to that conversation about the past. I think that's really, really meaningful, and a way to, for sure, get young students to realize that that history is applicable to them. They have a
and those questions you're bringing, and you're making them think. And you could say things like, well, if you were writing a letter, imagine if you, so you're engaging their imagination as well and saying, how do you think you feel?
Yeah.
And that is inviting them in, as you say.
Sure. And then I think it's that first, that initial curiosity, and that's something I try to communicate with students too, is that, or anyone really, whatever your age, that you can do history. You can be
Yes.
in this process of discovery. Sometimes, students, they, some history catches their attention. They decide to study that further, study historiography and really go down that path. But you don't have to do that as well. That history is, you're wanting to know the history of your neighborhood. I've done this almost every time I've moved to a different, one of my first stops is the library and the history room there, and trying to learn more about this place that I now live. I think about it as, if there's something that catches your attention, whether it's in an exhibition that you see, something that you read, or in a program. There's been so many great ones online through the Maryland Center these last months, that if there's something that catches your attention, you can take that thread and go follow it further.
Right, and that's following that thread. You think about, curiosity in cats. That's all the cliche about that, but they're just poking around or doing that. And you mentioned the fact that there are these activities that are happening. One thing that the Library of Congress has done in terms of their teaching with primary resources is encourage people to mine the historic newspaper collection. And that's something that we share with the Maryland Center, with the historic newspapers. And something as simple as, for your grandparents' birthday, let's look at the newspapers online from the day that they were born. And you can design a card, based and paste together. You might not ever have, that might not spark anything, but just conversation with that grandparent. Or what was it like when the bread was 25 cents or whatever, but using history as a way to communicate too.
Right. I think there's that personal kind of discovery that maybe that's what it is for you. It's that, maybe that genealogy research you just want for yourself, or you are using it to connect with your family members and share. And I see that happening a lot. One person in a family will be super interested in genealogy.
Oh, yes.
It's an addictive thing, but we'll share that out for the benefit of the family and beyond. Or there's that aspect of taking what you found and sharing it to your community or beyond. And that's so possible in your collection at the Library of Congress. Massive. Ours is for library, some 7 million items. There's so much to be discovered there that you can find your interest and run with it.
Well, the shelving behind you is so inviting, I must say. You just want to, and that's the thing, that being able to discover on your own. You're looking for one thing and you literally look and see something right next to it on the shelf. And say, oh, wait, I didn't know that. So and Maryland's history is so deep, really, when you think about it. And everyone, I think, can find themselves, if they're in this state, and I'm still in this state, in the center and finding connections to other institutions that might lead them.
Agreed. Yep. I think the history of Maryland really plays out in the nation's history, that there is so much to learn about the beginnings of this country, about civil rights, about whatever your interest is. And again, there's that excitement in that process, I think. And no matter what your background is, or whether it's personal or beyond. And I think that's something that I find really exciting about discovery too, is seeing how people share out their discoveries. I've seen people come in and researching some topic that they're going to translate into a play, and seeing history being communicated in that way, where even if you're not planning to come into the library yourself or do that research, that you might be learning about the past through the way that scholarship has been funneled out,
Right.
or through an article or other means. So all those exciting kind of ways that history gets out of the archive and out to the public.
And to have a playwright there, or somebody that's writing a play, and you know that it could be the next Hamilton. And it's all about Francis Scott Key, you know, or something, or that the different people and the characters and the people who are part of Maryland history. My goodness.
I remember one time in a town where I lived, somebody coming into the archives and saying, I feel like the history of this place has been written, and all the big topics have been talked about and written about. And I was thinking, no way, there is so much to explore, so much that is hidden. And I think that really, there's that opportunity for so many to, find what it is that you're curious about, and explore that, share that out. I remember, so in this town where I lived, a volunteer that I worked with had found in the newspapers, actually, newspapers are incredible, as you mentioned, Dr.
Yes.
Incredible sources of knowledge, and so many of them, many historical newspapers are available online through Chronicling America, many regional projects. So they're a great place that you can go to while you're at home to search. The Pratt Library has fantastic resources as well, leading to historical newspapers. But I remember a volunteer had found an article about in the local newspaper in this town in California. And the article was a letter from the Japanese community there in this small town out to the rest of the community. This was during World War II. And the letter basically said to the community, thank you so much for having us be here as part of the community. Thank you for having our children be part of the schools here and working here, having us working here. And essentially the impetus for this was that they were being rounded up and they were being sent to internment. And they signed their names at the bottom of the article, and that was it. And it really struck me personally. As I read it, I was thinking about the people and thinking about what were they feeling, what were they thinking. These words saying thank you and we hope to come back, but I could imagine that sadness, the anger, perhaps, this incredible mix of emotions. And I was so curious about that. And it was something that I ended up exploring and researching further through other newspapers and talking to people that I was able to find in the Japanese community. But I see that the way that discovery works sometimes in finding in one little item and just wondering more about it and trying to figure out how can I learn more. And there's that possibility. So that to me is one of those examples of a hidden story where you might think these big stories have been told, but there's so much under the surface that has not. Especially when you think about different communities and that have been underrepresented in archives and libraries, and the histories that have been told.
Now, Kate, do you think, and have you been involved in programs that allow you to, as the presenter and things, to share that discovery that you had with the young people, to give them examples, concrete examples too, are sometimes helpful?
Yeah, I have. So I worked in the public library world previously, and there was an interesting dialogue around that actually with again, talking about really interesting ways that educators are teaching history today. There was a teacher in this town, third grade teachers or third grade students learned local history. And the students did this project where they went around the town and they were learning about different historical markers, and they documented what was being honored, and they came back and they thought about, they interpreted with their class and their teacher, and they thought about what was honored and what wasn't. And they had some really interesting observations. The teacher thought it was so interesting that she asked a few of us from the local historical community to sit in. And it was a circle of students and a few of us from the library, local writers, and they shared their findings. And it was interesting. These are 8-year-old students, and some of the things they said were, there's no women, or there's very few women recorded, or there's one plaque for the American Indians of the area, but not much beyond. So I thought that was very interesting. It ended up being a dialogue, and we talked about some of the things that we were doing in our archives. We talked about this story that sparked my curiosity, and one of the local authors had planned to write. She was going to be working on a children's book about the American Indian population in the area. So I thought that was a great way of connecting, and it was really insightful to me to hear that these students felt, to me, so young, but I thought that it was this experience that was going to be remembered by them, where that was an active experience of going out into the town and really thinking about what they saw and what they weren't seeing. And I want to see more of that for us as the Maryland Center. Libraries, I think, are places, and museums are places of community, and you see that very much in the public library. I think there's a big shift to that, and I think that our organization can be that as well, that place of community. So I think that there's been a lot of change for us over this last year with our online offerings, our just rebranding, but to be the Maryland Center, I think there's that connection in that as well.
And that's why I say congratulations, and because it opens it up to so many more people. Mark mentioned, I had an opportunity years ago to bring a young lady, she was about 8, to an exhibit there. Mm-hmm. And boy, her eyes just went big, and she didn't even know that she could even enter it or that. And so she's in high school now, and you think about the young people you'll be able to connect with. You're physically in a Pratt's house is right there as part of it. So that connection to the Pratt Library Central that's right there, and just almost, and the museums, almost a campus feeling there, and all of the doors and working together has been something that, even with thinking about the Library of Congress, partnering with other institutions and exhibits and bringing things, and just making sure that it's not something that makes you feel like this, but bringing them in. And 8-year-olds, 7 to 10-year-olds, that's prime time for curiosity and discovery. And you shouldn't underestimate them.
There's an incredible network of libraries, museums right around us. And I think that is something we were talking about the other day, about that feeling of libraries sometimes being hallowed spaces, awe-inspiring spaces. They can be sometimes intimidating spaces too. I mean, I worked in libraries a long time and still feel that when I go to visit another research library, and there's lots of policies there about keeping things safe. I think that something that's very important for us is, and across the board, is that being welcoming, applying policies equitably, but we're on the front lines of the research there, and there to help you. And we do this because we truly enjoy working with researchers. So I hope that people know that behind this library here is a great network of people that are passionate about history and truly want to help out.
And showcasing them, and also just like you're not underestimating the intelligence or curiosity of an 8-year-old, you also want them to still have a sense that, yes, there is something special about going to the Maryland Center. And it is different from my branch library that has a lot of cool stuff too, but you do want to still retain that specialness so that they feel just as comfortable in the Maryland Center, and they like, wow, look at that. You don't want to lose that.
Right.
But you don't want them to feel that they're not welcome or that it's not for them. Yeah, I'm in here and look at this place.
Yeah, I think that with the network of libraries, and I see this in the way I do research of sometimes starting out with a general book, and then when you read that, you start to dive in and figure out what it is that's capturing your attention. You're going down a kind of narrower path in some ways, and maybe it's a bigger path than others, but kind of familiarizing yourself with that topic, and then looking next for those primary resources, and knowing that this item that I'm seeing is perhaps one of a kind. This might not exist in any other place. This is here, and it's being taken care of and maintained for you and for future generations. So one thing I wanted to talk about, in addition to that experience of researching in person, is just discovery online and what is happening with movements on the web and broadening access there. And that is something that you've been so central to at the Library of Congress. Can you speak to that?
Right, and you've mentioned it too with what's been happening with the center during this time and what you're doing on your website. And I mentioned that Engage page. And so we had 2 exhibits that at the Library of Congress that had opened that were really timely. Women's suffrage shall not be denied, and then an exhibit about Rosa Parks. And in March, we had to, of course, shut down physically. And so we made the transition to how can we make sure, even though we had digitized items from the exhibits to accompany the in-person exhibits, it was the switch to giving online tours of the exhibit with a curator who could be in the exhibit alone, and you could arrange that. But how do you take that in-person experience and make it memorable, usable, and kind of exciting? And so the other thing that we had to do was shift from the National Book Festival. It was the 20th year. First Lady Laura Bush started it 20 years ago with my predecessor, Dr. James Billington. It was going to be wonderful. Last year we had 200,000 people one day in the Washington Convention Center. And just saying it now, you think, oh my gosh, you can't even imagine it. Being able to shift that in 4 months to an all virtual book festival with 120 authors, just the lineup is just as wonderful. And to have it over 3 days, now this national festival is going to be available to anyone. You don't have to physically come, and you will see authors in their own settings. So you will see where John Grisham writes and what are the books behind him, and Doris Kearns Goodwin, and talk to her about her research, and you'll be able to engage in that way. So being able to look at the virtual as not a substitute, but a supplement to what we physically have. because some of the things need to be everyone can't touch the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. And they can't even be on display because of conservation issues for a long time. So it has helped us to be able to do that.
It sounds like an incredible program to participate. And thinking about online exhibits, right? There's been and online programs due to COVID. There has been this incredible shift and different methods of connecting online, and even though we've been closed, trying to facilitate discovery online. And I am really excited about our new website, so mdhistory.org. I think my colleagues have put that link in the chat. There is so much to explore there. We've launched these new digital collections, which is for us just a starting point. We see this platform really growing. I'm excited to make in this next year more oral histories available. We have a fantastic oral history collection at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Educational resources as well. There are online programs, we call them search programs. Some of these in person, they're hands-on opportunities to look at primary resources, but virtually we're still doing them where you'll be looking at primary resource documents online as a class with an educator. Also virtual exhibits. We had an exhibit couple exhibits that have opened in person, but one in particular that was supposed to be in a small space and is now online. It's called Forgotten Fight, and it is about the history of suffrage. And it is, as you mentioned, one of those examples of having to think really creatively at this time of how do you translate that experience. And it's a really fun exhibition. I encourage everyone to go check it out. It's mdhistory.org, and then there's an exhibitions page, which you'll find under museums. And my colleague has
Just put it up. Good.
Thank you. So it's an interactive exhibition, a really great one. The other thing about access right now and online possibilities is programs, this and others, where there have been many online programs over these past months on many different topics. The history of redlining. There's one about amusement park history that was focused too on the history of segregation in amusement parks,
right.
And many great programs. I think that while libraries are still getting up and running and museums getting up and running to open up again, that there are all these opportunities for that online discovery. And you can use any of these. I see this in my own experiences, again, watching a program and finding that one thing or maybe it's multiple things that stand out and that spark your curiosity, and that you might want to follow that trail.
And Kate, did you find that you were, and it sounds like at the center, you were already on that path of more digital engagement and how you could do it, and that with the pandemic, you were accelerated into this?
Yeah, that was for sure true for us. We knew this rebranding process for the Maryland Center for History and Culture was a long one. It didn't happen just when we closed our doors in March and reopened. So it was a couple of years of studies and research. And part of that process too was of rebranding and thinking about that new us was that increase of digital offerings, and having a management system to hold our digital materials and really getting a workflow in place to add to those collections. So that's something I'm so thrilled about, as more and more materials from the collections will be available online. That I know is a central part of your work as well.
And also that brings other challenges and opportunities, the funding to
Right.
keeping up with it, the staff to facilitate the requests and things like that, and looking to the future that you digitize it with one platform and thinking about the future so it will be preserved, just like we preserve the manuscripts and things to last for another 100 years. Think about the digital things that we're doing. So that's actually an exciting part of planning for the future and thinking about how you're going to make history available and accessible in the future too.
Absolutely. I think that that topic, you can't really talk about discovery, I think, without being able to, without talking about access to, and I know we've touched on that in different ways. And I know that, you know, when you were president of the American Library Association, that equity of access was your theme, that it is a core value of librarianship. So there are many considerations as you think about growing those online collections. As you mentioned, there's also that cost behind that, of that that staffing, as well as that preservation for those files. And we're in interesting, I mean, in this country we have, and have from the beginning had, different types of libraries, those that are publicly funded, nonprofits, museums. We're very much supported by our members, donors. We're a very creative staff. I think we're always looking for grant opportunities.
Yes.
So that kind of sustainability is something that is a big part of the dialogue too, for sure.
And it's been very heartening in a way to be able to talk with members of Congress about the impact of the pandemic on their local libraries and centers and museums during this time that people need them the most, and they have to be physically closed. And that really affects access, especially with public libraries. It's been very difficult for them to have their doors closed during this time.
I've seen some really great examples of that, reaching out and libraries really being creative at this time. Just hearing about computer lending, having Wi-Fi stations even outside. So it's been a time of great change, but for sure libraries trying to maintain that commitment to access despite these times. Dr. Hayden, I know that we've had some great questions coming in.
Oh.
We're going to turn to them in just one moment. I wanted to ask you one more question about how do you see, or what is it that excites you about the work that libraries and museums are doing today? And what do you want to see more of?
More of the engagement, more of bringing the materials that we care for and we have discovered ourselves as archivists and librarians and museum curators, bringing them to the public and making them available. That's exciting, because there's just to be able to have the Harry Houdini collection and make that connection with the Neil Patrick Harris, and say, and who's a magic, aficionado, and you're saying, hey, look at this, and then having him do something, or just bringing your collections to the public and letting people in Maryland know from all types of backgrounds, look what we have that relates to you. That's exciting to me.
I think that's exciting as well. And I think that I see this year as having been a huge new step for us as an organization. I'm so excited about the future and further diving into greater engagement and our new values of more dialogue and community. So I'm going to turn next to some of the questions that we've received. Thank you to our audience for contributing these. Starting off, and I think that this first question kind of dovetails on what we were what we have been talking about for sure is Matthew has asked, what more can young people do to discover history and be a part of it? And are there any examples that can be given or shared on what would constitute engaging discovery that we can be involved in?
Letting them help with making things accessible. The National Archives started a program of inviting people to, they crowdsourced a lot of the things that hadn't been transcribed. And the Library of Congress took that up. It's called By the People. And we're inviting people to help us transcribe. First, start out with letters to Lincoln, letters that hadn't been seen by anyone in decades. And that's a hook you're going to make by you helping us. There was the problem with cursive writing, but then you have the generational and all that, but talking about that. But inviting them to help you process materials, look at materials, be in on the opening up the access to things is one way. And also to make them think about being history detectives. Giving them things to look at. This we can't figure this out. You know, forensics. The Historian as Detective is one book that really got me with historiography. Remember you mentioned that term? I took the course, historiography, and that was one of the texts. So getting them excited about discovering things.
I absolutely agree. And I think, right, with having to think creatively right now and with these digital collections, there is, you've mentioned staff and the amount of work it takes to make something available online. And we want to be careful about what we put out there as well, making sure that it's accurate. And people have, you know, we have researchers reach out to us and say, I saw this photo, this person right now is unidentified, but I can help you identify that. Here is the evidence that I found. And because of the current situation, like we are thinking about how do we shift some of this, the volunteer work that we can do and that engagement to online. I think that with the digital collections, there are many opportunities there. So I hope to share more about that. This is a fun question from Laura, who asked, does the Library of Congress collect every book published?
No, and that was one of my reasons to start tweeting and using social media, because I, as a career librarian, made that mistake and said it one time and it was definitely corrected. No, the Library of Congress has, because of its administration of the US copyright system, has access to quite a bit of the publishing output. And so they are able to select from what's being published to add to the collection. So they don't retain everything. And that's a common misconception that even I held.
Can you tell us a little bit about that history? I know the Library of Congress was founded in 1800. The first Librarian of Congress was nominated in 1802 by Jefferson, right? And he, after Washington burned in the War of 1812, he helped to replenish the books there, and had kind of a vision of comprehensive collecting.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, and as you know, in Maryland, we know a lot about that war, quite a bit. And in fact, the Library of Congress started as a reference library for members of Congress, mainly law books, actually. And when the British came and started to burn the Capitol, they used the books from the library to start it. They actually have the fireplace there and you can see it. This is where they put the books in. Wow. Jefferson sold his collection from Monticello. He retired by that time, about 1814, and it's about 6,000 volumes. And it was when you said comprehensive, it was the most extensive collection in the United States at that time, because he had the Quran, he had books in all different languages. And as he said, there is no subject to which a member of Congress should not have to refer. And there were discussions heated in Congress about should they purchase this collection, because it did have all of these other things in it. But that was the foundation. And then in 1870, the Library of Congress became the custodian of the copyright system. And that's where the deposit requirement came in, and there was the opportunity to have the Library of Congress grow by being able to have access to the deposits.
Okay, thank you. So changing tack, we've got a different question that again kind of dovetails with something we talked about earlier about do you think that we will ever get that feeling and that community again in libraries and museums?
Oh, yes, yes. And the shift to the virtual has given more people access in some ways to our programming. That I mentioned that book festival and then we have shots of the library, just like you have that wonderful screenshot. You are making more people see physically what is possible, so that you're growing an appetite almost to wait. I can't wait till it opens. There's a really cool photo of the opening in person of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the joy that this gentleman has about being able to physically walk in again is something that we can tease out in that. So I think that you will be able to get it. There might be even more of an appreciation to doing in-person things and being able to be back, or wanting to see something that you could only see on the screen.
Absolutely. Our next question is from Stephanie, who says, it's so easy to assume that history is finite, that we've learned all that there is to know, but so many recent books show that there's still so much to be discovered. And we've talked about that. For example, Sweet Taste of Liberty by Caleb McDaniel, The Furious Hours by Casey Sebb, and Stolen by Richard Bell. A recent read of mine, and I absolutely agree on that. We've touched on this, but what would you say about all of the amazing stories from the past that are still to be discovered and would help us give a much more complete and just picture of the past?
That there are more stories to discover, and that we can help engage people with asking those questions about, well, what do you think this, and what does that mean, and what do you think those people thought? And just like you said, Kate, with the feelings, and to encourage deeper dives into aspects of history. We're living history now, and people are looking back and wanting to get more information about what they thought they knew, or they're hearing about historic events, and they're not able to find more information. So you want to grow scholars, you want to grow researchers, and give them that sense, and let them know that there are things that aren't processed, the things that haven't been found yet, things that history never stops,
Right.
and that they can be, so you can look back and reinterpret what had been written too. You mentioned that, Kate, about reinterpreting, looking at some of the same things but with different eyes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. How, as our attendee said, history doesn't stop. It continues on, and we're constantly interpreting, reinterpreting as new information comes to light. I think this question connects to, I like this one a lot, of what advice would you give to an early career archivist or librarian who would like to remain in the communities they grew up in, with the goal of providing accessibility to documentation of of
Oh.
communities who don't understand or who underrate the value of their own legacies.
And especially in communities that have seniors and you can imagine in churches where they have the church records, or they have different organizations and things, or people, veterans, who don't think that their stories are worth anything because they might have been in the supply department and not on the battlefield. It being more of an activist archivist, and getting out and making presentations and going into communities and going to meetings of different groups and being part of the community and expressing interest in those things and letting them know, oh, this is, wow, this is really something. And what are you going, where, how are you storing it, Miss So-and-so, the papers? Oh, okay. In Miss Lucille's house. Okay. And all that, so being involved, getting out of your institution into the communities.
And I have an added question onto that, where I know so many archivists who are doing really, really good work. And there is that added challenge right now of COVID, where being in person with the group is maybe not possible. And do you have any recommendations for how we can do that kind of outreach right now, given the current realities?
It's interesting that even in this time, those institutions or organizations are having to reach out to their groups virtually. Their city council meetings online, their church sessions online. And so going and making sure that you are connecting virtually to give them that sense of what's possible as well. And maybe just connecting your resources to their resources and what they're saying. And they can say, this is from the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and add that to their social media.
Right.
And you quite a bit of that interaction and looking for content. People are looking for content.
Right. All those meetings and that connection doesn't stop just because we're not in person. This is an interesting question about, when considering the costs involved in preservation and access, what unlikely sources of funding have you come across?
Some individuals who are concerned about history and preserving history and making it available. And of course, there's planned giving and people who are giving in that way. But of course, that is an area that you can, when you make those presentations or you're with people and you are letting them know about what your needs are, you might be surprised at people who would say, oh, I'll give to that. I understand. So there are more individuals, I think, that are interested in supporting that. We have the regular sources, government, foundations, corporations, but don't negate individuals.
Right. And I think I've seen, I think librarians, archivists, we are sometimes not necessarily loud about some of those needs of support and what we might need to help us do our work. And so there's that asking. The support from our communities, from donors, is incredibly important to our ability to operate. And so I've seen some creative ways that institutions have approached this, of thinking about the processing of one collection, trying to make that one collection, or continuing to provide digital preservation for it, telling the story of this one collection and putting it out there. Like, can you help us to support and preserve this collection? So let's see here. We've got a couple we've got a couple more minutes here. One from the educator crowd is, given the challenging times we're experiencing and the academic school year going virtual, how can libraries and museums engage students as well as be a resource in a virtual sense?
I mentioned the Engage page, for instance, that the Library of Congress has, and there are portals to getting involved with Dave Pilkey, who's a children's author, very popular, or our youth ambassador, or just doing programming specifically for families and young people. Make a birdhouse, or here's how you can make a lighthouse, based on the collection that we have with Alexander Graham Bell. So you can engage them with authors and being creative too about what do you have and what might interest them. The library has a comic book collection, sure winner in that, and draw your own comic book or do that. So you can do that.
Thank you. And I know, so it looks like we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. We won't have been able to get to all of these, but what we're going to do is take any of the questions that we weren't able to get to and answer these afterwards and share them out to our team.
Good.
So one question here is, what changes, if any, do you think the COVID-19 experience will bring to the Library of Congress?
Oh, you'll see more digital content and programming, and I would just encourage all libraries and museums and schools to be as creative as possible, because we are all looking at engagement digitally in a different way. And the people that we are reaching out to are seeing it in so many areas now. Different awards programs are online, all of these things. So to break into the digital fog, as it's been called, we can be very creative now and use the tools we have and use the materials that we have.
That's it. And then let's see too. So I think to wrap it up, we have a question about what the word library means. Nicola's asking, does the Library of Congress provide leadership in defining what the word library means? Where the dictionary maybe doesn't do the best job. The definition is 1, a place in which literary, music, artistic, or reference materials are kept for use, but not for sale, or a collection of such materials. So
sounds good. That's not too bad.
That's kind of a good one to wrap up on what is the library mean?
And a library is a treasure chest, and it includes it's a container of different ideas. That's how we reworked our logo design. When we worked with the designer in the thought sessions, they said, library is one of the few words in the language that if you divide it, you still know what it is. And so that's what we changed it to, that so library could be expanded. You could stop it at LIB, and then we put a violin in there because we have Stradivarius violins, and you can do all of these things with that word because it contains all of these things. And so and then you can touch it and music will start. So that idea of a library being, look at your screen. People should look at the screen behind you. That's a treasure chest waiting to be explored. And that's what libraries are.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden. I think those are excellent words to end on. And I want to thank our audience, and I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Martha Osterbiel, who's just going to say a few final words. Thank you, Dr. Hayden.
Thank you, Kate, and we have to keep in touch.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden and Kate, for allowing us to sit in, so to speak, on your conversation today about discovery. And echoing Kate, thanks to everybody who tuned in today. We hope you enjoyed the program. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the recorded version, so share with your friends or feel free to watch it again. I hope you will all consider attending our next core conversation, which is going to be dialogue with David Simon on October 22nd. Our Vice President of Collections and Interpretation, Allison Tolman, will join journalist, author, and television producer David Simon to discuss how we use multiple perspectives to uncover a more complete history in today's world. You can register for this program in addition to all of our other fall public programs on our website, mdhistory.org. I just want to let you know that we rely on the support of our members to produce this free virtual programming. And if you enjoy today's programs or any of our other recent programs and you'd like to see more, I encourage you to check out our membership levels and benefits on our website, mdhistory.org. And while you're browsing our new beautiful website, I hope you will check out our first ever virtual exhibition. Kate touched on it briefly. It's entitled Forgotten Fight, The Struggle for Voting Rights in Maryland. And I also encourage you to explore our enhanced digital collections. Our library staff and museum staff are adding to it daily. And we're very proud to be able to offer this access online while we're all social distancing at home. So with that, I thank you all once again for joining us. Take care and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.